I just wanted to say a couple of things. The first was partly prompted by, I think, something Kancha, I think it was her talk, in which she put in a map of things the concept of regulation as being central to it. And people have been asking me since the first evening, why are you so keen on going so far into the fundamental reaches to talk about unalienatedness and so on, and why didn't you bring up the point that if there are people who don't cooperate with the commons, in this case the atmosphere, the fresh air or whatever, but whatever commons there might be, that you regulate non-cooperation? Somebody asked that, not in the discussion, but that is, you wanted to try and present a different way of thinking, which is the unalienated thing, and which Amar picked up on his remarks and connected with violence and so on. Why didn't you say that there's non-cooperation and you should regulate it, punish it, police it? And that's another way of preventing what you were describing as destruction of the commons through non-cooperation. Why don't you police and punish? Why do you want to find another way of thinking, which is what I was doing? And the answer is that the way of thinking that I was opposing can be there to establish non-cooperation and regulation. You see, because regulation requires cooperation. Policing and punishment requires cooperation. And bribes and threats and so on are ways of precisely not cooperating with punishment and policing. I mean, if I can bribe a policeman, or if I can threaten a witness who's cooperating with punishment and policing, why can't I get away with it? Now, when you say this in Europe or America, they say, well, that's true of countries which have corruption and bribes and threats. We've overcome it. That's an astonishing thing. They've only overcome it because they've learned how to loophole the law. Mm-hmm. And not only that, they've learned how to create laws which bypass non-cooperation and encourage non-cooperation. And in fact, there's an enormous number of bilateral treaties which actually make it criminal to cooperate and punish you for cooperating. So they just go beyond the ordinary forms of regulation, these bilateral treaties. It's worth studying to what extent bilateral treaties between countries completely driven by corporations are loopholing the law. So bribes and threats can undermine cooperation in policing and punishment and regulation, but in cultures which claim not to have bribes and threats, they do it by other means. Okay, one last thing, which was prompted by Amar's latter remarks about the experience of struggle, and I think that's an extremely deep thing to think about. And part of here is a challenge about it, which is worth trying to theorize about. I mean, I don't think I have really thought about it enough, but I'll present it as something to think about. See, several things that Amar has said. One is that he's stressing comprehension, which you did, and the second thing is the experience of sharing that comes in struggle and so on. Here's something to think about. When I say something, suppose I say something to Rahul, and I see in Rahul's face that he's comprehended what I say. I see in his eyes that he's comprehended what I say. Right? That perception means we share the thought. The thought is ours. Right? So it's literally phenomenological. I say something, I see that he's comprehended it, and that moment is one where there's a thought that we both share. Now, I think the really interesting challenge, intellectual challenge, is to to go beyond this two-person example I gave to the collective example. I mean, I think the reason why movements actually make us come out of our pessimism, our feeling that we can't do anything, is because we've got some version of this sharing, which is what you're talking about, which I've given you a phenomenological example about, but I don't know how to do it more theoretically for the more collective case. But I think that is the power of movements, is that precisely that kind of. So, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Akeel. Ravi, could I invite you now?
I'll just say three things. Because I was not meant to be part of the panel, so I haven't really thought through it, but I'm thinking. And things which trouble me is actually the constant need to reproduce the local as local, because the global seems to be reproduced already. And the constant struggle, you have to constantly rethink what the local means and assert it. And I'm always concerned about this difference, this abstraction, because it's a false idea, because what is globally produced in a sense? And I think that it is in it's what we call the local, that everything is produced, that life is produced, that systems are produced. So somehow we are always wanting to have to contest something. We're in a situation where we are always contesting something. And what we are contesting seems to be much more better worked out. And when we try and even think of regulation, and what I've seen is regulation becomes another way in which capital flows better. And a lot of standardization, a lot of normative procedures are made in a way in which it enables the global to flow better. And so I'm ambivalent about, though being part of many regulatory mechanisms, but regulation making mechanisms, but I'm ambivalent about what it really means. What really flows through that regulation. And again, it's an idea of the local which needs to be controlled in a certain way, where normative behavior is the only way in which you can behave as something. And so that's this whole sort of framework troubles me. And I also want to move out of the framework of disaster, this constant thinking of disaster and crisis, because it only leads to one thing of saying that what will remain. And if there's the inevitable disaster of climate change or inevitable disaster of the Anthropocene, then what remains? And I think it's turning the question on the head, because a certain notion of disaster and a certain notion of the lived, produced life, where somehow we always have to think of disaster in some abstract terms. And I cannot make sense of it very easily. And it brings me to a third point of three words which have stuck in my head the last 2 days. And Akeel actually started the word alienation, which I commented, but it's, I think, for me, a very important word to think about, and because all these things I'm telling you is about alienation, is about as I live life and as I'm constantly in the place of contestation. The other two words which came out, I think, from Nilanjan was gratitude and debt. I'm thinking of the positionality of the self when we talk of nature. And of course, the political systems we deal with, but they're also systems of how we live our life, how we live in the world. And what are the qualities through which we inhabit the world, which become really important for us to reproduce anything or to live in what we might call any productive way. And I don't think everything can be politically solved through institutions. Institutions also are both fossilized, or they also become part of other systems, but they're also institutions in a sense. And there is much more than institutions in the lived life. There is us. And what qualities should we have to live in a way in which we have cooperation, which we have solidarity? These are not just political terms. They also, I think, places how we inhabit ourselves. And I just want to bring back somebody who's now always cannot be talked of, but controversially, but you raised when you talked of Hind Swaraj, is Gandhi. And I somehow can never get him out of my mind, though he's a very complex character and is full of contradictions, as we all are. But there's some things which he says are actually very, very important, and I think he still speaks to me in ways in which I need to think about more.
Could we open this up and have a wider conversation? We have about, Martin, how are we doing? 5 minutes? 5 brief minutes in which to, Darryl and Ram.
A quick question for Akeel before you leave, or anybody else in the panel. In thinking about the Anthropocene, would a change in grammar, meaning you drop the definite article and refer to Earth, not the Earth, help it to change from being an object to being a subject?
Yeah, I think that was the theme of some small part of Shreyer's paper, was about the ways in which the natural world, or the social world, you know, the world around us, the environment, can speak to us, right? That it's a subject in that way. And the question was, is that a metaphor or not? Is it literally true, or is it a metaphor? And that's the point at which I try to make the remark that you know, you shouldn't worry about it being a metaphor, because a proper understanding of metaphor means it's still describing a reality in the right way, and even if it's not literally vitalist. See, I'm not a vitalist, and I know that people are. Bruno Latour is, and Jane Bennett and so on, and others are. I'm not a vitalist. So I can't say that it's a subject in this. So when I say nature makes normative demands on us, I'm not saying it makes demands on us like I might make a normative demand on you, right? But you see, if I'm right about the nature of metaphors, and that they imply that even if it's not literally true that it's making a normative demand on us, which vitalists claim it is, it nevertheless is capturing a reality that's sufficient to make the point, the ecological point, or the point I'm trying to make. So it's but you see, what I think is really well worth studying is not the relativism that says, oh, these cultures believe they really are vital. There's vitalist intentionality in plants and trees and so on. That's what came with the inanimate screen thing that Scherer spoke about. So people say, oh, there's a relativism. Some cultures believe that there's vitalism, and Europe and America and Canada, at least the non-Aboriginal populations, don't believe it, etc. Well, I want to say that's a completely uninteresting relativism. The really interesting relativism is that they're all conveying the same thought, that nature is making normative demands on us. It's just that one culture necessarily does it literally, and another culture necessarily does it metaphorically, but they're both conveying the same important, significant reality. That's the relativism. Why is it that one culture necessarily does it metaphorically and the other culture necessarily does it? So it shouldn't be the relativism of vitalism versus something, you know, that restricts animation to a very small, but rather the relativism is about why some things are only expressed metaphorically in some cultures, which are expressed literally in other cultures. It's a far more rich relativism to explore, because it brings in history and language, the sorts of things that Ranjit spoke about. I've got to fly. Okay, I'm sorry to but I'm very late for something, and so I must go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ram, Shaina, Ram, and then you. No, Ram first.
Right. Maya, you've talked about the sort of a collective, an interconnected web, and so on, and there's been some discussion about rights and who has rights and who doesn't. Now, this seems to be some artificial intelligence, which, when embedded in a humanoid kind of species, has even been granted citizenship. What does this mean for extending the notion of rights? It's not just to animals or other living things, but these are artificially created constructions which some people choose to give names and give, as I said, citizenship. Any thoughts about that?
I think the IA question is very interesting. I mean, it depends, of course, on what we define as being the salient, relevant, critical criteria for determining things like sentience or having claims to make rights. And there are very many different approaches to this. Some make universal humanist claims, and others make the humanist claim based on an idea that we have some kind of greater intelligence, and therefore based on that, we have the grounds for making claims to certain special kinds of rights or privileges in the world, or some sort of executive function. But of course, things like, there have been great challenges to this way of thinking through disability studies that look at people who are physically or mentally disabled, and also studies that look at infancy and old age and periods when we can't exercise the kind of capacities that normally get used as the criteria, but nevertheless we don't want to take away the rights, or say that people who are, say, perhaps considered, IQ below a certain level don't have rights. So extending the IA, or rights to IA or other complex systems, natural or humanly created or otherwise, really depends on which criteria you're using to make the decision. And those are always grounded in certain subjective priorities of a particular time and place, and of course contestable. So it really very much depends on the grounds that we're coming from, whether or not we do that.
Did you want to come in?
That was my second comment. I think this is a completely uncharted area of what people call the post-human, post-nature, and it is not as abstract now as as a physicist. It's very much within the scheme of things. And of course we have machine learning now, and AI is, who knows, 30 years down, maybe 20 years, maybe 50 years, and it depends on what processing capacity you develop in the chips. And that's fast coming on it. And we've seen from the past that technology rises exponentially, So I think this is a completely uncharted area of what we need. We think of the future, and this is one of the things which he talked about, the technosphere. This is the one big sort of uncharted area. We don't know what it means to, maybe it means something in terms of lithium use and some rare earth metal use in terms of, but it changes everything in a sense. It changes social relationships, changes rights, changes, the level of integration of what happens. I wish I was talking science fiction, but I don't think I'm talking science fiction. And this is something we are not chartering in, and we are unable to charter in right now. And I think this is also how some of what we think about is also, we're not taking into account the current state of things completely. We're not able to take into account. So many of the things we are projecting the future, the shadow of the present, is actually a shadow of the far past. Because the present is not so easily accessible or legible as we might think it is. Yes, what do you say?
Yeah, no, just a little one. I mean, to us, it isn't.
To us.
Yeah, but to some others, it is totally accessible. I mean, if for instance if they already have a neurosis map, if they can district-wise, state-wise, region-wise identify what form of neurosis is existing around Kala Ghoda and what form of neurosis is, and I'm not joking. In that sense, if they already have a neurosis map and they can predict the way this neurosis can grow, then somebody has an idea of where we are at, and I'm not to contest you like that. Yeah.
Sorry, overseed you. It completely changes the data map of what we have. It changes the way we map anything, including non-human sensory perceptions of the world. So it brings in the realm of the forensic. Many things which we think are not possible to bring into forensic right now. And it changes the equations in which I don't know how it's going to change the equation. But you're right about also the political idea. Some people know, of course, we know that 6 of the largest 1 billion companies are IT companies, and then Google buys up 1 patent a day. So we know the power of that, where it resides, the development of those technologies. And so.
Okay, Shaina, and yours will be the last question because
Hello?
people are waiting to leave apparently. People have to fly out. So, Shaina, you get the last
I'll
one.
be very quick. I just want to very sincerely take Amar's provocation, not in the larger form of organization, but really when he said that the day and a half has been spent with deeply engaged people, with deep commitments in various levels of expertise. I wanted to link it to this Kabiliyat title, right? Are we capable? But of a future, what are we, what's everyone's level of deep engagement and expertise? But yet I found the activists working in policy to say there's a problem with regulation, lawyers saying never go to court, like, just a disavowal of the very disciplines, the fields of expertise we are embedded in, including artists, all the various fields and experts who are here. There's a disavowal of our own practice, on the one hand, which leads me to somehow to Ashok's matrix, which is where are our new sensory organs? What will be our new forms then? How do we expand our senses and our ways and modes of dealing with things, which then is already linked in his matrix and his line to sacrifice, but also to privilege escalation. Everyone who spoke here is embedded within that very institution they were disavowing, and we have the capability and tremendous privilege within that to hack into it, to subvert, to influence, to escalate, and then what he meant by the vertical escalations, and you redistribute those privileges in fairly radical ways till such time that they can be parasited upon and regrown. And so this is a question of maybe not how we destroy 2019 elections, but it's a larger but वो शायद बहुत immediate है. My question would be then a larger one in terms of how we live, of course. It's a really large question, but really how do you take our privileges, how do you take our disciplinary fault lines and limits and collectively then, as Amar is trying to say, to turn it around.
Fabulous. On that note of optimism, which I think is the right note to go out on. Thanks so much, Shaina. Thank you all very much. And in conclusion, I do want to thank Martin and Ravi and Bernd and the entire wonderful team, all the friends and colleagues at Mueller Bhavan Goethe-Institut. Thank you so much. Martin, would you like to say some?
Yes. I will not take any opportunity to contribute this discussions on the dice we just had, which was, I think, a very good wrap-up of threads pulled together in many ways. Thank you very much for doing this tedious job here. I must say it was a wonderful experience for myself and for my colleagues to have such wonderful people here 3 days and talking to each other and finding some understanding from so many different various backgrounds. And we see it only as a maybe a first step which can be taken further in different formats. During lunch that we should take this up more, maybe on a regular monthly basis, and give individuals, you and some others, the opportunity to unfold and explore the work you do and the field you dig deeper and have time to present what you are doing. There was obviously not enough time for us to go deeper. We had to remain a little bit on the surface in our exchange and to get some important glimpses, and I think we got them, and I'm extremely happy to take these glimpses back with me home and with the Goethe-Institut to continue to work on this. So I'm deeply thankful for your commitment, for your engaging here, taking almost 3 days off. That's something nowadays, yeah? And flying into Delhi, and I hope we meet again in this or the other form, and wish you safe travels home. And at the end, as a little gesture, I want to thank my colleague also, Amruta, who very much helped to make this possible, and of course also Jagdish, Robert, Selina, Falguni, they all contributed to have a smooth running of these days, and thank you very much. So,